Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. Shadows of the Night. Sergeant Emily Carter leaned back in her patrol car, the hum of the engine the only sound accompanying the stillness of the late-night streets. She checked her watch. It was past midnight, and the monotony of her shift was suffocating. This neighborhood, in her mind, was a barren wasteland, its streets lined with crumbling buildings, and its people struggling under the weight of poverty and misfortune. Emily had long since given up on believing that any good could come from this part of town. Her gaze wandered, lingering on the vacant storefronts and flickering streetlights. The silence of the night was heavy, a stark contrast to the bustling chaos she had grown used to in other parts of the city. She sighed, the sound filled with frustration and exhaustion. Nothing ever happened here, at least nothing worth her time. But just as her thoughts began to drift, something caught her attention. On the corner of a dimly lit street, a lone figure stood motionless, illuminated faintly by the pale orange glow of the streetlight. A black woman, dressed in a long coat, clutched a bag tightly in one hand. She seemed oddly composed, standing there in the dead of night as if waiting for something, or someone. Emily straightened in her seat, narrowing her eyes. There was something unsettling about the woman's presence. To her, it didn't make sense. Why would anyone be out at this hour, in this neighborhood, without an obvious purpose? Her mind immediately jumped to conclusions, fueled by years of ingrained biases and assumptions. People like her, Emily thought bitterly, were always up to something. She convinced herself the woman was either waiting for an accomplice or scouting the area for a crime. With a quick motion, Emily reached for her radio, but paused. No backup, she decided. This was her turf, and she wanted to handle it herself. She flicked off the engine and stepped out of the car, her boots hitting the pavement with a purposeful thud. Her hand instinctively hovered near her holster as she approached the woman. The night air was cold, and her breath formed small clouds as she exhaled, her steps echoing in the eerie silence. The woman turned slightly, her expression calm but unreadable. Emily's stomach churned. That composure unsettled her even more. Most people in this area would have either run or been visibly nervous by now. But this woman stood firm, her gaze steady, as if she had nothing to fear. It was almost as if she was expecting Emily. "What are you doing out here?" Emily asked, her voice sharp and laced with suspicion. She crossed her arms, standing a few feet away but ready to close the distance if necessary. The woman tilted her head, a small smile forming on her lips. "Walking," she replied simply, her tone even and polite. Emily scoffed. "At this hour? In this neighborhood? Don't play games with me." Her eyes darted to the bag the woman was holding. "What's in the bag?" "Groceries," the woman answered, lifting the bag slightly as if to show her it was harmless. "The store down the street stays open late." Emily's frown deepened. Something about this didn't add up. Her instincts told her to press further, but she couldn't put her finger on why she was so determined. "Mind if I take a look?" she asked, not waiting for permission before stepping closer. The woman hesitated for a moment before holding the bag out to her. Emily snatched it and rummaged through its contents. As the woman had claimed, it contained nothing more than a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and a few canned goods. Frustration bubbled inside Emily. She felt as if the woman was mocking her somehow, standing there so confidently with her bag of groceries as if she had nothing to hide. Satisfied but still annoyed, Emily handed the bag back. "You shouldn't be out here," she said curtly. "It's not safe." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Not safe for who?" she asked, her tone still calm but with a hint of amusement. "For anyone," Emily snapped. "People around here don't exactly have the best track record." The woman's smile faded slightly, and her expression grew serious. "Maybe the people here just need someone to believe in them," she said softly. "Ever think about that?" Emily blinked, caught off guard by the response. For a moment, she felt a pang of discomfort, as if the woman's words had struck a nerve. But she quickly shoved the feeling aside, masking her unease with a scowl. Don't lecture me, she muttered. Just stay out of trouble. She turned on her heel, ready to walk away, but the woman's voice stopped her. Sergeant Carter, isn't it? Emily froze, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't introduced herself. She turned back slowly, her hand instinctively moving toward her weapon. How do you know my name? She demanded, her voice low and tense. The woman smiled again, but this time it was different, more knowing, almost smug. Let's just say I've done my homework. Emily's pulse quickened. Something wasn't right. She took a step closer, her fingers brushing the grip of her gun. Who are you? She asked, her voice a mixture of suspicion and authority. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket, causing Emily to draw her weapon in a flash. Don't move, she barked, her adrenaline surging. But the woman didn't flinch. Slowly and deliberately, she pulled out a small leather wallet and flipped it open. Emily's eyes widened as she read the badge inside, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I'm Special Agent Maya Reynolds, the woman said calmly, holding the badge up for Emily to see. And I think we need to talk. Emily's world spun. The arrogance, the assumptions, the condescension, all of it came crashing down in an instant. Her grip on her gun faltered, and she took a shaky step back, struggling to process what had just happened. But Maya didn't waver. Her calm demeanor remained, and her piercing gaze locked onto Emily's. You've got a lot to learn, Sergeant, she said quietly. And tonight is just the beginning. Sergeant Emily Carter stood frozen, the weight of the moment crashing down on her. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she stared at the badge in Special Agent Maya Reynolds' hand. She had spent years on the force, building her authority and reputation, but in an instant, it all felt fragile, like a house of cards teetering under the weight of her own prejudices. Maya's calm but piercing gaze seemed to strip away every layer of Emily's carefully constructed armor. Why are you here? Emily finally managed to ask, her voice hoarse and uneven. Her hand still hovered near her holster, more out of habit than necessity now. Maya closed her badge holder and slipped it back into her coat pocket, her movements slow and deliberate. I think the more relevant question is why you're so quick to pull your weapon on someone standing on a street corner doing nothing illegal. Her tone was even, devoid of anger, but the words carried a weight that made Emily's stomach churn. Emily bristled, her defensiveness kicking in. This is a high-crime area, she shot back. You can't blame me for being cautious. Maya tilted her head, her expression unreadable. Cautious, or prejudiced, she asked quietly, the words hanging in the cold night air, like a challenge. Emily's jaw tightened. Look, I don't know what you think you're trying to prove here, but I've been on this beat for years. I know this neighborhood. I know the people. Maya stepped closer, her presence commanding but not overtly threatening. Do you? She asked. Or do you just know the stereotypes you've convinced yourself are true? Emily felt her face flush with anger and embarrassment. You don't know me, she snapped. You don't know what I've seen out here. Maya's gaze didn't waver. You're right, I don't know you. But I do know the difference between policing and profiling. And what you just did back there? That wasn't policing. The words stung more than Emily wanted to admit. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She was used to being in control, used to being the one who asked the questions and dictated the terms. But now, standing under the dim streetlight with Maya's unwavering gaze fixed on her, she felt exposed in a way she never had before. I'm here on an investigation, Maya continued, her tone softening just a fraction. And I don't have time for games or ego trips. So let me make something clear, you can either work with me, or you can get out of my way. Emily's heart sank. She had spent her entire career trying to prove herself in a male-dominated field, clawing her way up the ranks with grit and determination. But in this moment, she realized that all her years of experience meant nothing if her actions were driven by biases she hadn't even acknowledged. What kind of investigation? Emily asked, trying to regain some semblance of control. Maya studied her for a moment, as if deciding how much to say. Finally, she spoke. I'm looking into a trafficking ring operating in this area. Drugs, weapons, people. It's bigger than you think, and it's tied to people with connections far beyond this neighborhood. Emily frowned, the information catching her off guard. She had always thought of her beat as small-scale, petty crimes, domestic disputes, the occasional drug bust. The idea of something larger, more sinister, lurking beneath the surface unsettled her. Why here? She asked. Why this neighborhood? Maya's expression softened, and for the first time, Emily thought she saw a hint of something like empathy. Because people here are vulnerable, Maya said. They're struggling to get by, and that makes them easy targets for predators. The traffickers exploit that. They prey on desperation and fear. Emily felt a pang of guilt. She had spent so much time viewing this community through a lens of disdain that she had never stopped to consider the human stories behind the statistics. She looked down, suddenly unable to meet Maya's eyes. Maya seemed to sense the shift in Emily's demeanor. She took a step back, giving her some space. I'm not here to tear you down, Sergeant, she said. But if you're going to wear that badge, you need to understand the responsibility that comes with it. People look to you for protection, not persecution. Emily swallowed hard, the words hitting her like a punch to the gut. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but deep down, she knew Maya was right. She had let her own biases cloud her judgment, and it had cost her the trust of the very people she was supposed to serve. What do you need from me? Emily asked after a long silence, her voice barely above a whisper. Maya studied her for a moment before nodding. I need eyes on the ground, she said. People here know you. They see you every day. If you're willing to listen and learn, you could be an asset to this investigation. Emily hesitated. The idea of working with someone like Maya, someone who challenged her in ways she wasn't used to, was daunting. But at the same time, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time, purpose. I'll help, she said finally. But I need to know everything. No secrets. Maya's lips curved into a small smile. Fair enough, she said. But first, we need to address the elephant in the room. Emily frowned. What do you mean? Maya gestured to the patrol car parked a few feet away. That woman you've been on the job for years doesn't just disappear overnight, she said. If we're going to do this, you need to start seeing these people for who they are, not who you think they are. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to argue, to push back against Maya's words, but she knew they were true. She had spent so long building walls around herself, walls made of assumptions and prejudices, that she had forgotten how to see beyond them. How do I start? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Maya's expression softened again. By listening, she said. By asking questions instead of making assumptions. And by remembering that everyone has a story. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that Emily couldn't ignore. She nodded slowly, the first step of what she knew would be a long and difficult journey. As they stood there under the streetlight, the cold night air swirling around them, Emily felt something shift inside her. For the first time in years, she saw the neighborhood not as a lost cause, but as a place full of people with hopes, dreams, and struggles, people who deserved more than the labels she had placed on them. And as Maya turned and began to walk away, Emily called out to her. Agent Reynolds. Maya stopped and looked back, her expression curious. Thank you, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Maya's smile returned, warm and genuine this time. Don't thank me yet, Sergeant, she said. We've got a lot of work to do. And with that, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving Emily alone with her thoughts and the realization that her journey was only just beginning. Emily Carter spent the next few days grappling with the uncomfortable truths that Special Agent Maya Reynolds had forced her to confront. She returned to her usual patrols, but everything felt different now. Every corner she turned, every face she saw, carried a weight she hadn't noticed before. The neighborhood she had once written off as a lost cause now seemed alive with stories she had never taken the time to understand. But it wasn't easy. Her instincts, honed over years of cynical policing, fought against the change. She still felt the urge to assume the worst when she saw someone lingering too long outside a storefront or when a group of young men gathered on a street corner. It was like unlearning a reflex, slow, painful, and requiring constant vigilance. One evening, Emily received a message from Maya asking her to meet at a local community center. The building was a relic of better times, its faded paint and cracked windows telling a story of neglect. Emily had driven past it hundreds of times without a second thought, but now, as she pulled into the small parking lot, she felt a twinge of curiosity. Inside, the center was bustling with activity. Kids played basketball in the gymnasium, their laughter echoing through the halls. In a smaller room, a group of women were hosting a clothing drive, sorting through piles of donated items with warm smiles and easy chatter. Emily was surprised by the sense of community within these walls. It was a stark contrast to the bleak picture she had always painted in her mind. Maya was waiting in one of the smaller offices, sitting at a cluttered desk covered in papers, folders, and a laptop. She looked up as Emily entered, her expression neutral, but not unkind. "Glad you could make it," Maya said, gesturing for Emily to take a seat. Emily hesitated for a moment before sitting across from her. "What's this about?" she asked, trying to mask her lingering discomfort. Maya leaned back in her chair, studying Emily for a moment before speaking. "I need your help," she said. "We've identified a few key players in the trafficking ring, but we don't have enough evidence to bring them in yet." "That's where you come in." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" Maya pulled out a map of the neighborhood and placed it on the desk between them. She pointed to a cluster of buildings on the eastern edge of the map. "This area has been flagged as a hotspot for activity. We suspect it's where they're storing goods, drugs, weapons, maybe even victims. But we need someone on the inside to confirm." Emily's stomach churned. "You want me to go undercover?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Maya shook her head. "Not exactly. I want you to use your connections. You've been on this beat for years. People know you. They see you as part of the system, for better or worse. If you start asking the right questions and paying attention to the right people, you might be able to get us the intel we need." Emily felt a pang of anxiety. She had spent so long enforcing the law in a way that kept her at arm's length from the community. The idea of suddenly trying to engage with them on a personal level felt daunting, if not impossible. "I don't know if they'll trust me," she admitted. Maya's gaze softened. "That's something you'll have to work on," she said. "But trust isn't built overnight. It starts with small steps." Emily nodded, though she still felt uncertain. She glanced down at the map, trying to absorb the weight of what Maya was asking her to do. It wasn't just about gathering information, it was about unlearning years of habits and biases, and finding a way to bridge the gap she had created between herself and the people she was supposed to serve. Over the next few days, Emily began her new approach. She started small, striking up conversations with local shop owners and residents during her patrols. At first, her attempts were met with skepticism. People were wary, their responses curt and guarded. But Emily persisted, reminding herself of Maya's advice to listen and ask questions rather than make assumptions. One evening, while walking through a small park near the center of the neighborhood, Emily noticed a young boy sitting alone on a bench, his head buried in a notebook. She approached cautiously, not wanting to startle him. "Hey there," she said gently. "What are you working on?" The boy looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, he seemed unsure whether to answer, but eventually, he held up the notebook, revealing a page filled with detailed sketches of buildings and streetscapes. "These are amazing," Emily said, genuinely impressed. "You're really talented." The boy's expression softened, and a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Thanks," he said quietly. "I want to be an architect someday." Emily felt a pang of guilt. She had spent so long viewing this neighborhood as a place of despair that she had overlooked the potential and aspirations of its residents. She sat down on the bench next to the boy, careful to give him space. "Do you live around here?" she asked. He nodded. "Over on 10th Street, he said. "But it's not a great place to draw. Too many people hanging around." Emily's curiosity was piqued. "What do you mean?" The boy hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening. "There's this old warehouse a few blocks from my house," he said. "People are always going in and out, and they don't look like they're there for anything good." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Which warehouse?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. The boy described the location, and Emily felt a surge of excitement. It matched one of the buildings Maya had flagged on the map. She thanked the boy for sharing and promised to check it out. The next day, Emily met with Maya to share the information. Maya's eyes lit up as she listened, her demeanor shifting from cautious optimism to determined focus. "This is good," Maya said. "Really good. If we can confirm activity at the warehouse, it could be the break we've been waiting for." Emily felt a flicker of pride but quickly reminded herself that this was just the beginning. There was still so much work to be done. That night, Emily and Maya conducted surveillance on the warehouse. They parked a discreet distance away, using binoculars and a camera with a telephoto lens to monitor the activity. It didn't take long for their suspicions to be confirmed. Cars came and went at odd hours, their occupants unloading crates and packages under the cover of darkness. As they documented the movements, Emily felt a growing sense of purpose. For the first time in years, she felt like she was doing something that truly mattered, not just maintaining the status quo, but actively working to protect the community. But the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous the situation became. One night, while conducting surveillance, Emily noticed a man lingering near their car. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by a hood. Her instincts kicked in, and she nudged Maya. "We've got company," she whispered. Maya followed her gaze, her expression tightening. "Stay calm," she said. "We don't want to tip him off." The man approached the car, his movements deliberate. Emily's heart raced as she gripped the handle of her door, ready to react if necessary. But just as the man reached the window, another car pulled up, and he turned to speak with its occupants instead. Emily exhaled shakily, her adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Maya placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Stay focused," Maya said. "We're getting closer. We can't afford to let fear get in the way." Emily nodded, her resolve strengthening. She had come too far to back down now. Together, she and Maya continued their work, determined to bring the traffickers to justice and, in the process, redeem not only the neighborhood but also themselves. Emily sat in her car the next morning, the rising sun casting long shadows across the quiet streets. She stared at the warehouse down the block, its decrepit facade hiding the dark secrets within. The previous night's surveillance had been nerve-wracking, and though they had avoided detection, the tension still lingered. She tapped her fingers against the steering wheel, her mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. The investigation was progressing, but Emily knew they were inching closer to danger. Maya's calm demeanor during the surveillance had been reassuring, but Emily could see the weight of the operation in her colleague's eyes. This wasn't just about gathering evidence, it was about dismantling a network that thrived on fear and exploitation. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a tightrope, one wrong move away from disaster. Determined to stay productive, Emily decided to use the day to further engage with the community. Maya had emphasized the importance of building trust, and Emily knew she still had a long way to go. She parked her car and began walking through the neighborhood, stopping to chat with residents and business owners. Though some interactions were brief and guarded, others offered glimpses of hope. She met an elderly woman who had lived in the area for decades, a small business owner struggling to keep his shop afloat, and a group of teens practicing basketball in the park. Each conversation added a layer of depth to Emily's understanding of the community. She began to see the resilience and strength that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. It was humbling, and for the first time, Emily felt like she was beginning to truly connect with the people she served. Later that afternoon, Emily received a text from Maya, meeting at 6. Community Center. Bring anything new. Emily glanced at her watch and realized she still had a few hours to spare. She decided to swing by the local diner for a quick meal and to decompress before the meeting. The diner was a small, family-run establishment with checkered tablecloths and a faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. Emily slid into a booth near the window and ordered a sandwich and a cup of coffee. As she waited for her food, she overheard a conversation between two men sitting at the counter. They spoke in hushed tones, their expressions serious. "You hear about the drop tonight?" one of them said, his voice barely audible. "Yeah," the other replied. "Warehouse on 10th. Big shipment. Gotta keep things smooth." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She quickly pulled out her phone and pretended to scroll through it while discreetly listening to the rest of the conversation. The men didn't say much more, but it was enough to confirm that something significant was happening at the warehouse that night. After paying for her meal, Emily left the diner and immediately called Maya. "I just overheard something," she said, keeping her voice low. "There's a drop happening at the warehouse tonight. Big shipment." Maya's response was immediate. "We need to act on this. Meet me at the center. We'll plan from there." Emily drove to the community center, her mind racing. She knew this was their chance to make a breakthrough, but the risks were higher than ever. If the traffickers realized they were being watched, it could escalate quickly and dangerously. When she arrived, Maya was already there, studying a map of the area. She looked up as Emily entered, her expression serious. "Good timing," Maya said. "We need to move fast. If this drop is as big as you overheard, it could be a turning point in the investigation." Emily nodded and pulled up a chair. "What's the plan?" Maya explained that they would set up surveillance around the warehouse to document the transaction and identify key players. She had already contacted a few trusted colleagues at the FBI to provide backup if things went south. Emily's role would be to stay on the ground, using her familiarity with the neighborhood to navigate the area discreetly. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily and Maya positioned themselves near the warehouse. They parked their car in an alley a few blocks away and proceeded on foot, keeping to the shadows. The air was cold and still, the silence broken only by the occasional hum of a passing car. When they reached their vantage point, they crouched behind a stack of old crates and watched as vehicles began to arrive. A black SUV pulled up first, its tinted windows concealing the occupants. A moment later, a cargo van arrived, followed by two more cars. Men stepped out of the vehicles, their movements purposeful and efficient. They began unloading large crates from the van and transferring them to the SUV. Emily's grip tightened on the binoculars she was holding. "This is it," she whispered. Maya nodded, her camera clicking softly as she captured photos of the exchange. "We need to identify as many faces as possible," she said. "Keep an eye on their movements." Emily scanned the scene, noting the details. The men were heavily armed, their weapons visible even in the dim light. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, appeared to be in charge. He barked orders at the others, his voice sharp and authoritative. Suddenly, Emily's gaze shifted to a smaller figure being led out of the van. It was a young woman, no older than 20, her face pale and her movements hesitant. She looked terrified, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. "They've got someone," Emily murmured, her stomach twisting. Maya's expression hardened. "We can't let them leave with her," she said. "But we need to be smart about this. If we go in without backup, it could get ugly." Emily nodded, her mind racing. She couldn't stand the thought of leaving the woman in their hands, but she also knew the importance of following protocol. Maya radioed for backup, her voice calm but firm as she relayed the situation. As they waited, the tension grew unbearable. The traffickers continued their work, seemingly unaware of the two women watching from the shadows. Emily's heart pounded as she glanced at the young woman again. She was being shoved toward the SUV, her captors growing increasingly agitated. Finally, the distant sound of sirens broke the silence. The traffickers froze, their heads snapping toward the direction of the noise. Chaos erupted as they scrambled to load the remaining crates and flee the scene. The man with the scar shouted orders, his voice rising above the commotion. Maya and Emily exchanged a look. "Time to move," Maya said. They emerged from their hiding spot, their weapons drawn. "FBI! Drop your weapons!" Maya shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. The traffickers hesitated for a moment before opening fire. Emily ducked behind a crate, adrenaline surging as bullets ricocheted around her. She returned fire, aiming for the tires of the vehicles to disable them. The young woman screamed as one of the traffickers tried to drag her into the SUV. Emily acted on instinct, breaking cover and sprinting toward them. She tackled the man, knocking him to the ground. The woman stumbled back, her eyes wide with fear. "Run!" Emily shouted, motioning toward the alley. The woman hesitated before bolting, disappearing into the darkness. Emily turned her attention back to the fight, her focus narrowing to the immediate threat. Maya was holding her ground, her shots precise and controlled. Within minutes, the backup arrived, their flashing lights and sirens signaling the end of the standoff. The remaining traffickers surrendered, their weapons clattering to the ground. Emily and Maya exchanged a breathless glance, relief washing over them as the scene was secured. As the dust settled, Emily's thoughts returned to the young woman. She scanned the area, hoping to catch sight of her, but she was nowhere to be found. Despite the chaos, Emily felt a sense of accomplishment. They had made a dent in the operation, and the woman had a chance at freedom. Maya approached, her expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. "This is just the beginning," she said. "But it's a damn good start." Emily nodded, the weight of the night settling on her shoulders. She knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt like she was on the right side of it. Together, she and Maya had taken a step toward justice, and Emily was ready to see it through to the end. The aftermath of the warehouse raid was a whirlwind of flashing lights, blaring sirens, and coordinated chaos. Officers secured the scene, documenting evidence while agents from the FBI swept through the warehouse, cataloging crates of drugs, weapons, and other illicit goods. Emily stood near the perimeter, her breath visible in the cold night air, her body still humming with adrenaline. The scene was a victory, but the faces of those involved, especially the young woman she had helped escape, lingered in her mind like a shadow she couldn't shake. Maya approached, her expression tight with exhaustion but laced with quiet satisfaction. "We've got enough evidence here to make a real dent," she said, holding up a notepad filled with notes and details. "The scar-faced guy you tackled? Turns out he's a mid-level player in the ring. With the right pressure, he might give us the names we need to take this even higher." Emily nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. "The woman, do you think she'll be okay?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Maya studied her for a moment before answering. "She's free now, thanks to you." "That's a start. But finding her, making sure she's safe, that's another step we'll need to take." The words settled heavily on Emily's shoulders. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. For years, she had thought her job was about maintaining order, writing tickets, and arresting those who broke the law. Now she realized it was about so much more, about fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves, about breaking cycles of exploitation and despair. Over the next few days, the investigation moved into its next phase. The men captured during the raid were brought in for questioning, their resistance slowly eroding under the pressure of mounting evidence. Maya worked tirelessly, piecing together the fragmented web of the trafficking operation. Emily, too, found herself drawn deeper into the case, her patrol duties temporarily set aside as she assisted in identifying key locations and individuals connected to the network. One name kept coming up during the interrogations: Victor Kane. He was described as the mastermind behind the operation, a man who kept his hands clean while orchestrating the movement of goods and people with ruthless efficiency. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't pin him down. He was careful, elusive, and always one step ahead. Late one night, Emily and Maya sat in the cramped office at the community center, poring over maps and notes. The dim light of a desk lamp illuminated their faces, the quiet hum of the heater the only sound in the room. "I don't get it," Emily said, rubbing her temples. "We've dismantled so much of his operation, but he's still out there. How does someone like Kane stay invisible?" Maya leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing in thought. "He's not invisible. He's just hiding in plain sight. People like Kane rely on layers of insulation, lieutenants, middlemen, disposable players. But there's always a crack in the armor. We just have to find it." Emily stared at the map, her mind racing. "What if the crack isn't in his operation?" she said suddenly. "What if it's in his connections? He has to rely on someone, somewhere. A supplier, a buyer, a courier, someone who isn't as careful as he is." Maya's eyes lit up. "You might be onto something," she said. "If we can trace one of those connections, it could lead us straight to him." The breakthrough came 2 days later. A routine traffic stop by one of Emily's colleagues turned up a van loaded with unregistered firearms. The driver, a nervous young man barely out of his teens, had been hired to transport the weapons to a storage facility on the outskirts of the city. Under questioning, he admitted he didn't know much about the operation but provided enough details for the team to locate the facility. The storage facility was nondescript, one of many scattered across the industrial district. Emily and Maya led a team of agents and officers in a coordinated raid, uncovering another cache of contraband along with a ledger detailing transactions and names. One name stood out, a shell company linked to Victor Kane. It was the first solid lead they had on Kane's whereabouts, and it ignited a flurry of activity. Maya and her team worked around the clock, piecing together financial records, surveillance footage, and testimony from those already in custody. Slowly but surely, they built a case that pointed to Kane operating out of a luxury penthouse in the heart of the city. The decision to move on Kane wasn't made lightly. The risks were high. Kane was known for his paranoia and had a network of enforcers who would protect him at all costs. But Maya and Emily both knew they couldn't wait any longer. Every day Kane remained free was another day his operation could rebuild. The night of the operation, Emily found herself standing outside the towering skyscraper where Kane's penthouse was located. She adjusted her vest, her nerves a mixture of tension and determination. Maya stood beside her, her calm demeanor a steadying presence. "This is it," Maya said quietly. "We take him down tonight." Emily nodded, gripping her radio tightly. The plan was straightforward but risky, a coordinated entry by 2 teams, one through the lobby and the other via helicopter to the rooftop. Emily was with the ground team, tasked with securing the lower floors and cutting off any escape routes. As they moved into position, the atmosphere was electric. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears as the team breached the building, their movements swift and precise. The lobby was quickly secured, and they began ascending the stairwell, their footsteps echoing in the narrow space. When they reached the penthouse, the tension reached its peak. The door was reinforced, but the team's breaching equipment made short work of it. They stormed inside, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Kane's enforcers put up a fight, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Emily moved through the chaos with focus, her training taking over as she cleared rooms and secured suspects. She finally found herself in a lavish office, where Kane sat behind a massive desk, a smug smile on his face. Well, he said, leaning back in his chair. "You've gone through a lot of trouble to find me." Emily leveled her weapon at him, her voice steady. "Victor Kane, you're under arrest." Kane didn't resist as the team cuffed him, though his expression remained infuriatingly calm. "You think this changes anything?" he said as he was led away. "Cut off one head, and 2 more will take its place." Emily didn't respond. She had heard those kinds of threats before, but they didn't matter now. Kane was in custody, and his operation was in ruins. It was a victory, even if the fight wasn't over. As the night wore on, the weight of the operation began to sink in. Emily and Maya stood outside the building, watching as the team loaded evidence into trucks and escorted suspects to waiting vehicles. The city skyline stretched out before them, a sea of lights against the dark sky. "You did good tonight," Maya said, her voice filled with quiet pride. Emily nodded, a sense of accomplishment washing over her. For the first time in years, she felt like she had made a real difference. But more than that, she felt like she had finally found her place, not as a bystander to injustice, but as someone willing to fight for what was right. The journey had changed her, reshaping her understanding of what it meant to serve and protect. And though the road ahead would be challenging, Emily knew she was ready to face it, one step at a time.